you know, yeah, eclectic. Let's just say eclectic.
And when you're doing throwing everything at them, what are you typically looking for in a change work session to let you know the session is going along the right lines? Because
Well, like I said, I always calibrate before we begin.
yeah,
Before I start working with people, something I learned from Dave Dobson, is the other than conscious hello thing that he does, which is kind of a rapport skill thing. But you learn from a person how they say yes and how they say no.
mm,
It's because everybody has a particular unique way. Obviously, nodding their head up and down is a universal, pretty much universal yes gesture.
mm,
And everyone has a particular kind of variation on that. They'll add some shoulder movement or shake their head in a particular way. Maybe they'll nod upwards first. The head goes upwards first before it nods. And maybe there's 2 or 3 nods. Maybe it's just one quick nod. Maybe their head starts downwards first. Maybe, all sorts of different little variations go into that. And they don't know that they're doing that. They're just saying yeah, or saying yes. So you ask them their name and get spelling and where they're from and, little things that perhaps already the answer to, but you want to see for sure that it's a yes. And then you get their no. So your name's Dave? Oh, so it's not Doug. Oh, okay, so it's Dave. Oh, I see. I know a bunch of Daves. But you look kind of like a Doug to me. You're not Doug? So you get, you know the answers, but you're getting these calibrated skills. And then you find out what their problem is, and so you notice how they're using their body language with the problem.
yeah,
And then I say, okay, so what do you want instead of that? Because, anything not than that is okay, but what would you prefer to have? Rather than fear of heights, do you want to love heights? Do you want to start becoming a pilot? Do you want to, what do you want? So then they tell me about that, and I notice their nonverbal patterns for both the problem state and the desired state.
okay,
So then, what I'm looking for, no matter what I'm doing, whether it's hypnosis or NLP or whatever, is a change in those patterns. So that when they start telling me about their problem again, if they start talking about it, but enact the physiology of the changed state, then I know I'm done.
okay. And
And if they tell me that they're fine, but they're still doing the physiology of the problem state, then I know I'm not done.
how many sessions typically do you see your clients?
I prefer to see people at least twice, maybe 3 times,
Right.
even if they feel like they're done after one session. I don't mean to be mercenary, but part of it is financial. I want money. No, I'm kidding. Just a joke.
Well, you want
I've got my own car payments to make, Buster. Hey, supported many therapists. No, but seriously, sometimes you get a change, and then they go home, and they get all these anchors. I was working with this woman in a hospital once. I used to work at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. I was the hypnotist on their Department of Complementary Medicine, so I would hypnotize patients prior to surgery for the most part. And I was working with this woman who had come into the hospital, and she was there for a long time. Some of the patients they'd have complications, or they'd need a heart transplant or something like that, so they'd be there for a long time. She was there for 6 weeks. She'd been a heavy smoker. She'd smoked like 2 to 3 packs a day.
Right.
And in the hospital, none at all. She'd gotten off it. She'd gone through a little hospital program for it, and I'd worked with her, and she didn't have any issues at all being a non-smoker in the hospital. But as soon as she walked in her front door, after 6 weeks of being in the hospital, as soon as she walked into her front door, within 5 minutes, this woman was smoking again. And I saw her again like the week following it, because she came back for a follow-up, and also she wanted a session of hypnosis to help her quit. And I went like, what the hell did you start for? Why are you here? And she said, I don't know what happened. I walked in the front door, and before you knew it, I had a cigarette in my hand. I don't even know how I got there. And so it just has all these anchors, There's these unconscious anchors that are everywhere. John Grinder once said, you cannot not anchor. Everything's an anchor when you stop and really look at it that way.
Yeah.
So she had, her telephone was an anchor for her to have cigarette, because she used to smoke there endlessly, having conversations with the ashtray, the aromas, just the house itself. I mean, all kinds of things were anchors for her. So we had to, sort of strip those away one by one, and I gave her a CD, a reinforcement recording that I recorded in the session. I typically do that with people, is I'll record the session and give them a CD these days. I used to give them tapes, but now it's different technology.
Yeah. So I imagine it was cheaper than telling her to move then, if a lot of her house was anchors.
I did actually suggest to her that she rearrange her furniture a bit.
Yes.
Which she did. To her credit, she actually did that. And throw away all of her ashtrays. And I had her do some pretty radical things. At least in her mind, they were pretty radical. Throwing away the ashtrays, I thought, would be like a no-brainer. But to her, it was like, but I love that ashtray.
Sentimental value.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you were to look at the long-term change of a person, then is there certain things that you find need to be present in long-term change, like changing their environment being one, and other things that you find?
Not necessarily. The change in the environment is, in extreme cases, good. Obviously, it changes those anchors. But basically, if you can swap out the anchors for the same stimuli, creating a different response, then you're okay. So swish patterns are great for that, So every time you see that telephone, you now feel this determination to be a non-smoker and take a deep breath and feel so good inside. So the anchor of the phone becomes an anchor not for having a cigarette, but an anchor for being a non-smoker.
Right. So
you do this swapping of anchors, if you will. And the neat thing about the brain is it does tend to generalize, as you're aware, I'm sure. We delete, we distort, we generalize.
Yeah.
So I think after 2 or 3 or 4 maybe of these swish patterns or these anchor swaps, if you will, the brain starts to go, oh, I get it. Every time I see something that used to remind me of that, now it reminds me of this. So it starts changing those patterns that way.
Okay.
But there does seem to be a need for a particular critical mass, which may be different for other people than, one person than another. So you want to make sure that you're getting a congruent response from the person that, in fact, they are solidly changed and congruently having different patterns and different responses.
Brilliant. Okay. And one of your trainings that you do, amongst others, is a storytelling workshop with Nick Kemp.
Stories. That's it. I love that class.
Absolutely. So obviously you have a whole workshop on it, but if you could just summarize the kind of the important components that make up a successful story within therapy.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to ask me about the class. So you're asking about what are the components of a successful story within therapy? Yeah,
you do a lot of storytelling within therapy. Is there a certain framework that works best in regards to telling a story that allows them to take the suggestion more?
Okay. Excellent question. In fact, I think I have at least 3 or 4 different ways of doing that now that I stop and think about it. I think in a way, my basic frame, the way I think when it comes to working with people is kind of a mix of looking at it in a sleight of mouth perspective. Because in the sleight of mouth, how is the belief structured? What do they believe that keeps them where they are currently? And what do they need to believe to move them out from that? So then I want to lead them from one belief or belief system to another belief or belief system. And so I'll use any tools at my disposal, including sleight of mouth or metaphors, whatever. But one of the patterns of sleight of mouth is a metaphor pattern, which is to say you tell them a story that illustrates how the belief system that you want to lead them to is right, and the previous way of thinking is less right, or perhaps even wrong. Yeah. So you lead them by telling a story. You lead them to seeing this new way of thinking, this new belief system, how that works, and how that's really true. So the story is an illustration of that. So a lot of my stories are that kind of thing, leading them to a new way of thinking by illustrating how that really does work in a variety of contexts for a variety of people. Other times I'm telling stories, they're more of a kind of, isomorphic metaphor kind of construction, where you're telling a story that's very parallel to their situation.
Right, okay.
So you start off with once upon a time kind of thing. There was a person just like you in this situation. It was just like yours. And they had this realization that brought them to this new way of thinking, and now they're living happily ever after. You can do it as directly as a person like that, or you can have it be a little bit further afield, have it be the kind of story that maybe happened a long time ago to your grandparents, or maybe it could be something that happened to an animal that and it's a story about a turtle in the desert or something like that, and you tell this story that's the same parallel story but less obviously so.
Right.
So you can tell these isometric metaphors in different ways. Sometimes I'll go even further and tell these kind of multiple embedded metaphors, where I might start with that kind of direct metaphor, which is usually kind of easier for the client to notice what it is that you're doing. They know why you're telling them that story.
Yes. Yeah.
And then in the middle of it, I'll leave off and start telling them some other stories that have other points to them. And sometimes they may not know what those points are consciously. They may be a little further afield, if you will. But within that, because I have an awareness of using language patterns, I can really take any story. I can tell you, as an example, I just came back from a boxing class. I'm literally sitting here in gym shorts and a t-shirt because I literally 10 minutes before we started this conversation walked in from the gym. I take these boxing classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Okay.
And so I could just tell a story to you if I wanted to about going to this boxing class. And as I was walking to the boxing class, thinking I was late, my boxing instructor ran past me saying, "Hey, you come into class?" And I thought to myself, just when you think that life is one way, something happens and everything turns, doesn't it? Like you can have a sudden realization now, Aaron, that everything's shifting for the better. And, you just, I'm just saying bogus stuff, but, you can shift your tonality and give an embedded command within a little story that has nothing to do. I want to buy a carton of milk. And I read on the milk carton, like, wow, you can do anything you want. It didn't actually say that on the milk carton, but I could tell you that it did. But it says, pour on the good. It does. I'm looking at the milk carton. I have a milk carton because I just had a cup of tea. It says, pour on the good. Isn't that good? That's good. Pour on the good.
It's very motivational, these American milk cartons.
Yeah. They're great. Oh, fantastic. You should hold some of them, because you guys have bottles, don't you, mostly?
Cartons mainly, but not as motivational as they.
No.
We just have semi-skimmed on ours, or full fat.
Well, okay.
But so when you were learning like stories, did you kind of have a book where you wrote anything that you found interesting in your day and things like that you can draw upon, or is it so ingrained in your muscle memory that you can literally pick up anything and just tell a story about it, and so you're doing it more on the cuff now?
Yeah, more on the cuff, I would say, at this point in time. When I was started out, and I still do from time to time, sit down and write out stories, because I think that something I